Greetings and salutations. Today we'll be covering the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Barrazar. Elizabeth Barrazar, or as she was better known by her friends and family, Liz, was an individual who was said to have a very big heart. She was a self-identified nerd and a Star Wars enthusiast, and she was known for enjoying making her own costumes and cosplaying. She loved everything, absolutely adored everything, from comic books to Harry Potter. She was known for enjoying making costumes specifically for her favorite settings, such as Star Wars. This went so far as to allowing her to be officially inducted as a member of the very well-known group, the 501st Legion. This is an internationally renowned and highly dedicated group of fans who have all shown a dedication and panache for creating extremely realistic, lifelike costumes, specifically of Imperial Stormtrooper armor, Sith Lords, Clone Troopers, Bounty Hunters, and other villains from the Star Wars universe. They did it all. Much like the rest of the 501st, they did a lot of charitable work, such as visiting children's hospitals in full costume. Elizabeth and Sergio would often go to the local hospitals dressed in high-quality costumes that were homemade, to brighten the days of children who were often in some of the worst situations. It was January 2019 when Elizabeth and Sergio had been preparing to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. This led Elizabeth to planning a weekend at Universal Studios Orlando, where they intended to indulge in their love of Harry Potter in Potterworld. To help pay for the trip, Elizabeth decided to have a small garage sale just outside her home in Tomball, Texas, a community that was widely regarded as being safe and welcoming. This is where the pair had intended to build their family and raise their future children. Unfortunately, some dreams, no matter how bright, will never be. Elizabeth would go on to advertise the sale the night before. This led her to expect a decent turnout, and it would be on the morning of January 25th, when Elizabeth would start setting up the yard sale, significantly before the crack of dawn. At 6:48 a.m., her husband would leave for work, whereas Elizabeth would continue to set up everything for the garage sale. Unfortunately, the pair would not notice that they were being watched. A threat was looming over them, a veritable omen of death. It would be just 4 short minutes after Sergio left for work that a neighbor's surveillance camera caught a black Nissan Frontier pull up just a short ways away from the Barrazar's home. The camera footage shows what looks to be a woman with long hair exiting the car and making her way to the Barrazar home. It appears that for some reason, Elizabeth was startled by the sight of the person approaching her. Supposedly, she goes as far as to take a step back. However, one must consider that she might have just been startled by someone walking up to her that early. Following this, the pair have a brief exchange which lasted somewhere between 8 to 10 seconds. That's definitely not a long conversation, at least not one long enough for someone to decide to shoot you. And after, the unidentified woman pulled out a gun and fired upon Elizabeth 3 times. The first missed. However, the following shot struck Elizabeth in the chest. Her killer then proceeded to move to look over the now injured Elizabeth before firing a final round, this time to Elizabeth's head. Following this, the unidentified woman quickly retreated back to the car before driving off. It must be noted that she did not take any items that Elizabeth had set out for the day, nor any of Elizabeth's money, which was in the clearly visible cash box. Elizabeth's Ring doorbell camera, while not being able to record any visual evidence of the event, was able to record some of the audio. Unfortunately for everyone, the audio is mostly muffled, to the point that it is hard to make out any of the conversation between Elizabeth and her would-be slayer. The one thing that most people have been able to agree upon is that Elizabeth greeted the woman by saying "good morning," as if she did not know the person or recognize her eventual assailant. After hearing shots fired, Elizabeth's neighbors immediately got in touch with the authorities. Unfortunately, no one was able to get a good look at the assailant themselves, nor had any of them recognized the assailant's vehicles proper. Shortly after the authorities were contacted and an ambulance arrived, the mortally wounded Elizabeth would be taken to the same hospitals she often volunteered at. Tragically, the 29-year-old would pass away. Even in death, Elizabeth showed herself to be a giving individual, as her being an organ donor allowed her to save and or improve the lives of multiple people. Her heart, her liver, her kidneys, and her corneas were donated to save and or improve the lives of exactly 4 people. Now we must ask ourselves, who was it exactly that killed Elizabeth? Her husband Sergio was questioned. However, he was ruled out. There remains 0 physical evidence that ties him directly to his wife's unfortunate fate. Now that is not to say there's absolutely no evidence or no suspicions, just 0 physical evidence. Nor does anything show any connection to her friends or family. No showings of an affair, no jealousy, no interpersonal conflict, nothing of the like. She really appeared to be a very pleasant and sweet individual. Even though there hasn't been any evidence that has moved the case forward, authorities have been able to find a few pieces of evidence that have somewhat narrowed down what could have happened. One of them is the fact that there were no shell casings. This helps narrow down things greatly because it would kind of point that there's a revolver involved rather than a regular pistol. And this was partly noted because in the video, at no point does the assailant pick up anything or anything even remotely like shell casings were left at the scene. Now, it could have been a 3 or 4 shot Derringer, however those are somewhat rare and expensive, so it's significantly more likely that it was a revolver. Police also found out that the killer would eventually return to the scene of the crime. 2 minutes after shooting Elizabeth, authorities speculate that it had been in an attempt to be certain that Elizabeth was dead. This kind of shows the optics that it wasn't a professional killer, or that it was the first time this individual had killed anyone. The fact that the killer had not taken the money or any of the items that Elizabeth had set out points to it not being a robbery gone wrong. The idea that it was a random act of violence is also ruled out by the fact that the killer's car was actually caught on surveillance footage from another one of the security cameras of a neighbor. And that car had been profiling or stalking Elizabeth's home. Unfortunately, another thing that mired the investigation was the fact that the footage was not good enough for the authorities to determine if it was actually a woman that shot Elizabeth. Or instead of a woman, it was actually just a man in disguise. There are those who believe that the white robe that appears to be worn by the killer, along with the white boots, are actually significantly more reminiscent to Princess Leia's own outfit, meaning that they believe that it could have been a cosplayer who had met Elizabeth before, and without showing any outward signs of a grudge, for some reason developed an obsession for her, or with her and or her husband, but had not made the acquaintanceship of the couple, but instead followed her on social media. That could potentially explain how the individual knew that Elizabeth would be on her own outside. This would also potentially explain why no one in Elizabeth's inner circle would be able to point out anybody at all who would have a personal grudge to cause Elizabeth's murder. There's also suspicions that arose from the Barrazar show. The detective on the case says that Sergio tried to downplay that Liz had a life insurance policy, which turned out to be $250,000. But it had a clause that it would double if she was murdered, so the payout would actually be $500,000. And while Sergio hasn't collected it, this is partly due to the police not having fully exonerated him yet. And Sergio has implied that his father could have been involved in the murder somehow. At the time that Liz was killed, he did work for his dad, and he had said paychecks from his dad were bouncing, and his dad was spending all his money on mistresses. And it was noted that Liz had complained about that. And it was also mentioned on the same show that Sergio had been in no hurry to get to the hospital. But on the other hand, he supposedly told that he was detained by police for questioning when he arrived at the scene of the crime. It was said, though not clearly, that he had stayed around even after he was told that he was free to go. Sergio had also said something that was notable. He had said that he believes only a few people knew about the garage sale, saying, "Only people that I know knew about the garage sale was some of his coworkers, himself, and her parents, and his mom." He also said that he put up a couple signs up the night before, going insofar as to say, "We placed signs the night before. We placed 2 signs, one at the entrance of our neighborhood and one just outside the road." Elizabeth's family continues to make appeals for the public to share any form of information that could lead to the individual who committed this heinous act against Elizabeth to be brought to justice, and for some form of closure to be had. It must be noted that even though there is a $50,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible, no one has come forward with any actionable information, and unfortunately, we are still no closer to knowing who her killer was. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.